is week 2 of our series on the 5 basic unity principles. And the first is that there's one presence and one power in the universe, God the good. Or in short, God's everywhere. Number 2 is that there is a spark of divinity in each of us. Some call it the Christ, and our purpose is to express more and more of our divinity. That's it. It's that simple. Now this is a point where unity theology takes a different perspective than much of Christian theology. You see, many traditional churches see Jesus as the great exception, and here we see Jesus as a great example. In Colossians 1:26 and 27, it's written, "The mystery that has been hidden throughout the ages and generations, but has now been revealed to his saints. To them God chose to make known how great among the Gentiles are the riches of the glory of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory." Christ in you, not just Jesus, just saying. So let's break it down a little bit. So the mystery has been revealed. See, Jesus taught love and compassion for everyone, right? And personal relationship with God. And this was a new idea then. And so this was the mystery of a new life. And this wisdom was made known to those who were ready to hear. You've also often heard you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. That's kind of what it is. The wisdom has been made known to those who are ready to hear. And this wisdom, in short, is that the Christ, or the divine, is your hope of glory, or enlightenment, or a better life, or whatever you want to call it. So, it's false that we're born sinners. It's a construct created many years ago to control people through fear. This principle instead says that we are born blessed, perfect, and whole. And I think that many people show up in unity because they felt a disconnect from many traditional teachings. They feel something in them saying, well, no, wait, I'm good, I'm worthy, I'm enough. And if we truly believe that there's one presence and one power in the universe, and that it's God, which is inherently good, how could we be anything less? The logic doesn't work any other way. But the trouble is though we are all made of God stuff, we are born with the same raw potential as Jesus, we've also made a lifetime of decisions. And if you're like me, not all of your decisions have been made from a place of wisdom. That's okay. It happens to all of us. The culture we live in is a great reinforcer of the misbelief that we are separate from one another and that folks that are different are something to fear. Our culture also reinforces inadequacy and not worthiness. If you don't think so, flip through a woman's magazine for half a second and you will see that there we have done a lot to reinforce the idea that we are inadequate in some way. Not that that's the only place, but advertisers are really good at that. So last week, I told you I would answer the question of why bad things happen to good people. That's one of those classic questions that people want to know the answer to. So we got to pull this apart a little bit. And the first part we're going to talk about is the idea of good or bad people. See, people are all made of the same God stuff. And the hiccup is that there are infinite variables of what could happen next. Choices are made. This person gets positive reinforcement. This one only gets attention when they misbehave. One sees people around them being hurtful and violent. Another experiences harmonious kind of model of how to interact. These things are not the final answer of how someone will be their entire lives. And most of us have probably had some combination of all of that. But there's certainly a trajectory that continues to influence our future choices. Whatever reinforcement one gets, whether it's the adrenaline of stealing or of saving a life, the person will likely continue on that track because It makes sense. It feels good. So we are all a result of a lifetime of choices. And some choices that were made for us by our parents who took care of us when we were younger. And we make our choices through the filters in which we see the world. The more we know the truth of our divinity and the divinity of others, we are able to make more life-affirming choices that bring more joy and more love to the world. However, those who have had a lifetime of seeing themselves as separate can make what we might consider horrible, reprehensible choices that harm others. So whomever you consider to be bad, evil, horrible, all in quotes, remember that they started with a baby with no badness in them. Wherever they are and whatever horrible things they have done is a result of a lifetime of choices that obscured their view of the fact that there's God in all. Now, this does not mean that there's not consequences for actions and that people shouldn't be held accountable. They certainly should. But this does not make them less a fellow expression of the divine, even if they're not expressing it very well. So part of the answer of why bad things happen to good people is the explanation I just gave. We all have free will and to make whatever choice we want to make. But we're also sharing this world with a bunch of other people, which means we're out there bumping into everybody else's choices. So you may be a perfect driver and think, it's not even, I don't even really need insurance because I'm a perfect driver and I never have any problems. And if you were the only person out there driving, then that might actually be a logical conclusion to make. But not everyone is out there making as good choices as you are. And there's all this other stuff that we have no control over and that aren't even a result of other people's bad choices, like earthquakes and tsunamis and, moose. You can be the best driver ever, and that is not going to stop the moose. I'm just saying. So, these things happen to everyone, and they have nothing to do with your goodness or badness. They're just things that happen. So even if all the world started making decisions from their divine wisdom, bad things, quote unquote bad things, would still happen. Natural disasters, encounters with wildlife, disease, this would happen. As Sue says, you didn't know this, you were going to be in the talk. As Sue said, we all have to die at some point. But this is not a story about how we have no control over the situation. This is just the setup. You see, we still have the ultimate power, and that is to choose how we feel about each situation and respond to each situation. Viktor Frankl was the well-known Holocaust survivor and psychologist, and he said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. In our response is where we get to choose. Do we choose love or fear? Understanding or condemnation? Compassion or violence? Are we choosing from the knowing of our divinity or from our misbelief in separateness? That's what it all comes down to. So one of my favorite things to follow on the internet is a page called Humans of New York. It's run by a photographer who started going around New York, and he'd photograph people of all walks of life and ask them questions about their life, and some of the answers he would post along with the picture. And currently he just finished a series on the pediatric wing of the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And so for 2 weeks he shared the stories of the families, the patients, the staff. And in one story, a nurse tells about this research that a doctor was doing. and how he had run out of money, and yet it was really, really promising. Currently, only about 10% of kids diagnosed with, I don't remember what exactly it was, were surviving. And so, because they were out of money, they brought together the parents of the current patients, there was about 20 of them, of this particular cancer, and said, look, this is the situation. We have this really promising idea, but we're out of money. And the parents said, we'll find it. And so those parents who've already been, they're wiped out already by medical stuff, they managed to raise $2 million. And they knew that this cure was not going to come in time for their kid. But they did it anyway. A few days later, they shared a story about a little girl whose family had been told that there was nothing left for her. But they went to the Sloan Kettering Center, where they gave her an experimental antibody. And it worked. There she is. And that antibody that saved her life, and 60% of people who have this particular kind of cancer, was the one that group of parents mobilized to raise the money for. She wants to be a pediatric surgeon now. Now, no one would fault those parents if they said, I want to focus the rest of my time that I have left with my child. But they didn't. They realized they could choose to make something positive out of the situation they were in. And they made it possible for this girl's life to be saved. And certainly many more to come. And who knows what other research will come from that. And this is the choice point that Dr. Frankel is speaking of. Each stimulus is a chance to choose to move forward more to express our divinity. Here's the thing. We're all God stuff with the divine spark within. But since we've also been living in the world and making all sorts of choices, some of us probably haven't made all of our choices from our highest expression. Anybody else other than me? Then that's okay, because you know what? It happens, right? Like I said, the only thing you can change about the past is how you feel about it. So, now's the time to decide to do better. That's all we got to do. We decide to do better. So we practice making choices from our divineness. There was that trend a while back where they said, what would Jesus do? And it really wasn't that far off. Because if Jesus is a great example of how to live one's life, then asking what would Jesus do in a situation, that's a pretty good filter. But for some of us, that seems a little too difficult to relate, right? Because the life that he lived, world that he lived in was very different than the world that we live in. Pretty much almost completely different, right? So maybe you have other role models to reflect on. Maybe your Aunt Rose was the nicest, kindest person you ever knew. What would Aunt Rose do? Maybe it's somebody like the Dalai Lama who inspires you, a spiritual leader, and you go, all right, what would the Dalai Lama do? It's a good question to ask. Maybe it's different people in different situations. Maybe have someone who's your kindness person, and maybe you have your person who's your, business I don't know, whatever. Maybe it's different people. But really, these are all just different ways to ask the question, what is most honoring of who I am and who the other person is? And how can I respond best from the truth of who I am, which is made of God stuff? So that's your mission this week and every week. This is like not just this week homework. This is like forever lifetime homework. Of course, it usually is, but in each moment, we get to be mindful of the divine spark in us and the people around us. Look in the mirror. This is the one person a lot of people have the most difficulty seeing the divine spark in. It's the person in the mirror. Right? You don't have to admit, but it could be true. So, look in the mirror and say, today I'm going to be the best Christ I can be. Or, if you don't like those words, you can say, I'm going to be the best divine spark I can be. Or whatever works for you. In these moments, when you might be urged to respond in an unkind or hurtful way, because maybe that's our default response, remember, what would Jesus, Aunt Rose, the Dalai Lama, or the highest version of me do? Sometimes I ask myself, what would the future me want me to do? Assuming that the future me is doing even better than me now, right? What would the future me want me to, how would the future me want me to respond in this moment? Also thinking, what kind of trouble am I going to get myself into? So, while remembering the truth of who you are might be something easy to wrap your brain around on a cognitive level, it can often take some time for it to trickle down to our thoughts and our actions and our default settings. But don't be discouraged. We practice. We forgive ourselves and others. We practice. Stay the course. You are an individualized expression of God. So is everyone else. You are here to remember and express our divineness through our words and actions. You choose.